Chancellor with the Archdiocese of Louisville. Welcome to our podcast series, What's New in ArchLou. This show highlights the people and ministries of the Archdiocese of Louisville, the Catholic Church in Central Kentucky. Join us each month as we welcome guests to discuss what's new in the Archdiocese and invite you to get involved as you deepen your faith and your engagement with the Church. This program is brought to you by the ArchLou Podcast Network. Now, before we get into our presentation today, our conversation with our guest, we should remember it's December. This is the holy season of Advent. We're about to celebrate Christmas. So blessings on you and your families, to all of our listeners and viewers if you're watching this in December. If you're seeing it after that, hope you had a good Christmas. If you're getting ready for it, hope it's a blessed time. Okay, so today we're really excited to have a special guest, DeJaco Crutcher. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Catholic Charities of Louisville. Lisa joined our staff in 2017 after practicing law for 17 years at Wyatt Terton Combs, a local law firm here in Louisville. She and her husband Mark have 2 children and are members of St. Agnes Parish. Now, Lisa, before we get into the content for today, welcome.
Thank you.
And why don't you give us a little more information, a little more biography beyond what I shared about that?
Sure. Well, you hit the high points. It's hard to come up with something else. I'd say the next thing I'll say is that I'm a 6th-generation Louisvillian, and I have sort of the classic Louisville German Catholic heritage. My great-great-grandparents celebrated 50 years of marriage at St. Martin of Tours, where they were married in 1865, which is pretty amazing. So they and their wedding party all still alive. My grandmother was still able to fit in the wedding dress, which was pretty impressive.
Okay. All right. A 6th generation. Okay, yeah. That's very good. All right. We're going to talk today about Catholic Charities, but we're going to just a little bit more about you. I'd like to know, when someone is a lawyer and practicing law for, over 15, 17 years there, and then you expressed your interests and got brought into our team heading up our largest social service agency, obviously the largest one besides the government in Kentucky. What motivated that for you?
I get that question a lot, and it's always hard to know exactly how to answer. I think, it really came as a process of a lot of prayer and discernment. Like you said, I spent 17 years in private practice as a litigator at Wyatt Terton Combs, and I always loved my firm, and I'm still friends with many people there, and I always enjoyed my job. But, around the 15-year mark, I really started to feel that God was calling me to do something else with my time and talents. I'd always had a lot of civic engagement. I also began work on a master's degree at St. Meinrad at that time, and just sort of through the process of all of those things, just tried really to stay open to what the Lord was calling me to do. And then this position at Catholic Charities came open, and here I am.
Lots of professions outside the church is good and sacred work, including the work of law. But social services, what about that in particular? Because you could have done education or something else as a church person. What about social services?
Yeah, I think just the fact that it felt really important for me to be using my time and gifts in the service of people who were really trying to make the world a better place.
Very good. Okay. Now, our topic is really what's new at Catholic Charities. Lisa and her staff promote Catholic social teaching, an important part of our theology as Catholics, and provide greatly needed services throughout the whole community. In fact, throughout all 24 of the counties the Archdiocese serves. Before we get into the specific programs, let's start with the mission question first. Lisa, tell us about the mission of Catholic Charities.
Yeah, so, charity is the third essential element of the church, along with preaching the word and the Eucharist. So that's from the very beginning of the church. We know that that's always been the case. And Pope Benedict actually wrote that in his encyclical Deus Caritas Est. He talked about the three legs of the stool of the church. And as you said, the church is the largest social service provider in the United States outside the federal government, and it's the largest in the world. So every diocese in the world has a Catholic Charities. In most places, they call it Caritas. which means, of course, charity in Latin. But this is what it means to be Catholic. This is what drew people to the church in the very early days of Christianity, was that love that Christians had for one another, the care that they took for the poor and the widows and the orphans among them. This fall, I was at the Catholic Charities annual gathering, and the keynote speaker, who was the director of Interfaith America, he himself is a Muslim, but he spoke to the group about the powerful witness and impact of Catholic Charities work in America and around the world. And he said, "You are the go and do likewise people." And that really resonated for me.
That's a great line.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that Catholic Charities does that we're going to unpack here. The statement, best kept secret's an overused line, but I really believe it's true about Catholic Charities. I get to know what goes on. There's a big picture here that you are leading. So let's take some pieces of it. Even in a single podcast, we can't cover everything Catholic Charities does. So let's pick out some highlights, if you can. Let's talk about the big news that's on your mind. I know as we're sitting here in December, you have a new headquarters being put together directly related to your new growth. After that, we'll talk about refugees. We'll talk about ombudsman work, and we'll talk about human trafficking. We'll talk about all those things. But let's talk about buildings first. That's pretty boring, but it's pretty significant for you.
It is really exciting for us. We are so excited to be in one place, almost all of our staff coming into one place. 2 of our programs, as you know, are in mission-specific locations. So Sister Visitor Center, which serves the West End, and Common Table. But everybody else, all of the rest of our programs, which is about 125, 130 people, will be coming together in one headquarters location on East Broadway. And we're really excited because it's going to be so much easier for our clients to have all of our services in one place, so much easier for them to get to, as well as for volunteers to get to. We're right off I-65, all the buses go down Broadway. So there's going to be really great opportunities for collaboration within the building.
And it's going to have heat.
Yes. Yeah.
It's wintertime, Lisa, and I know your staff, the buildings you're existing in now at St. Anthony's and Holy Name parishes, those are some pretty old stately buildings.
So cold. Yesterday I had my gloves on in the morning. We realized somehow the heating unit on our floor, so the whole building was cold. Our floor was particularly cold. We had accidentally left it on air conditioning. So it was freezing, but the whole building was cold. They're poorly heated. They're not accessible. We don't have there's not an elevator or wheelchair lift anywhere down at St. Anthony. It's just very difficult for us to operate. So we're very excited about a new building that will be adequately heated and fully accessible, but also, really importantly, giving us that opportunity to bring all of our services together.
Now, the location is important because
Yes.
I believe it's accessible to lots of other partners in social services, Catholic hospitals, and I'm sorry, not just Catholic hospitals, all the hospitals in the
Yes.
city that are located downtown, all that connections there. Talk about location for me.
Yeah, so this is the old AAA building. Anybody my age and older is familiar with the old AAA building down on East Broadway. But it actually backs up to the health department, which is really handy for many of our clients. We're really close to Golden Arrow, which is right around the corner at St. Martin of Tours Parish. We're really excited to help amplify their work. We're working on a partnership with St. Vincent de Paul, which is only a few blocks away, around warehouse space, which we will need. But we're right there in the locus of a lot of different social service providers, and that's going to be a great opportunity for us also.
Now, do you have a move-in date?
Painfully, no. It was supposed to be over the holidays. There's been some recent delays on manufacturing issues, and so now it's looking like the second half of January.
Well, you're bringing a kind of a significant building on Broadway back to life as a social service partner, and that's a great thing. Now, buildings are expensive.
Yes.
And I know that to do this, you raised over $5.5 million to help pay for the new building and purchase it. But there's still fundraising needs and going on. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And if people wanted to help, what can they do?
Absolutely. So we were very fortunate that the building itself was in good shape, but it was most recently operated by Stockyards Bank. They're doing very different things there than what we're doing. So we just need to reorganize the building for the work that we're going to do in it. And unfortunately, with supply chain issues being what they are, costs are a lot more than we were anticipating when we bought the building around this time last year. We are so thankful for all the support that we've gotten so far. Individual giving from the parishes, a gift from the Archdiocese. That enabled us to buy the building. Renovations originally were ballparked at about $1 million, and it's turned out to be closer to $4 million. So, we have a plan, but anyone who is able to consider a gift, Building a Brighter Future is the name of our capital campaign, and you can check out the Catholic Charities website to learn a lot more about it, or just call us.
I want to endorse this initiative because the efficiencies and impact of Catholic Charities is clear on this community. Having a facility that's able to allow your staff to do their work in a more effective way is even better.
Well, and I'm also really excited about that big sign that's going to be going up on Broadway because, as you said, we are a little bit of a well-kept secret, and I love that people are going to be able to drive up and down and see the name and the Archdiocesan logo right there on the side of the building.
That's great. Very good. Okay, let's some of the other programs. One of the programs that people hear a lot about, because it's a big one for our local Catholic Charities, is what we refer to as refugee resettlement. Now, that word alone has people get confused about what some of that is. There's been a number of changes and growth in recent years. Let's talk about what refugee resettlement is, and then how does it actually work. We can even get into the money sources if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a question that I get from a lot of people because I'm afraid the news media in general doesn't always do a really great job of distinguishing who refugees are. As a legal matter, refugee resettlement is really different from other immigration. Refugee resettlement starts with the United Nations in areas that are having great turmoil. Those United Nations Red Cross refugee resettlement camps. Only about 1% of the displaced people in the world will be resettled. Many people want to go home to their native countries, but others decide, enough with the camps. These problems aren't going to be solved. I want to start over with my family. And so they register with the UN. And then countries that accept refugees, and there aren't many, Canada, the U.S., Australia, Sweden, but those countries decide who to take and from what parts of the world. So the State Department is at that table internationally making those decisions. The federal government decides on a number, and then they literally go through and pick out who can come. The background check has 13 stages. I probably couldn't pass it. It is so extensive. Everything you can think of. It takes several years. There are health screenings. All kinds of things go into this process. But eventually, an individual or a family is told, you're in the line. The State Department within the U.S. has 8 or 9 national partners, and the largest of those is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which is, of course, our national partner. The national groups have their networks all over the country. So the State Department gives notice to the USCCB, and the USCCB passes that word down to us and says, this is who's coming. This is how many people are in the family, their ages, their relationships, when they're going to arrive. That's when my staff steps in. So our staff, our migration and refugee staff, we use the acronym MRS a lot. The MRS staff meets people at the airport, takes them home, gets the kids enrolled in school, gets the parents into English as a second language classes, helps those parents find jobs. It's very intense services for the first 60 to 90 days, after which most employable adults are working. But then they receive some level of services for the next couple of years. And that's where the Kentucky Office of Refugees comes in. And you said we'd talk a little bit about funding, and this is sometimes where things get complicated. So the Kentucky Office of Refugees is housed within Catholic Charities of Louisville. We are the federal agent for all the funds that come to the state of Kentucky for those longer-term services. So some of those funds come to our own MRS program, and some go to Kentucky Refugee Ministries, and then there are other resettlement agencies in Bowling Green and Owensboro and Lexington. But the Kentucky Office of Refugees is also distributing funds out to health departments and school systems in all the communities that receive refugees all across Kentucky. So that can make our budget look really weird because we're responsible for all of that money. We receive it.
Let me ask you about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So the government identifies families from a particular country. We'll get into some examples in a minute. and they give us funds.
Yes.
It's not just our funds. They give us funds to provide help them find a place to live, help them get medical care, help them get job training, right? There's money that comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important to know, most of these services are federally funded, and this is a money-making program for the federal government. I mean, not in the very short term, obviously. In the first 60 to 90 days, you're investing those funds. But the longer the horizon is, the more money the government is making back as those refugee families pay taxes. Refugee families have a very high rate of employment. They actually have a higher rate of entrepreneurship than native-born Americans. I mean, this is something that the longer you look at it, the more you see that this is a program that is good for the country as a whole. It creates revenue for the country.
Now, I on a personal level, I was part of helping one group of families arrive at the airport one evening, and it's a very powerful scene. These folks are coming from anywhere in the world, and they don't know anybody.
Yeah, no.
They may or may not know a little bit of English. I know you have lots of folks on your staff with language skills and
yes.
translation skills. But the idea that someone is coming to a place that we know is safe, that we know will be good for them, but they don't know anything other than some place called Louisville.
Right.
I just got off a plane.
Never heard of, if they know anything about Kentucky, maybe they know Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's it,
Okay.
right? That's completely new. And you said you went one night. It's somehow almost always at night. It's always the last flight. It always gets delayed. So our staff and oftentimes volunteers are there waiting at the airport at 1 and 2 in the morning, greeting people who have been traveling for 36 hours, from a refugee camp in southern Africa to Germany to,
Every year there's different numbers of this, but just give us a flavor. This year, if you could ballpark it for me, in 2023, how many refugees did get settled through your agency?
Yeah, so this year that number is probably in the 400 to 500 range. Okay. And of course that's individuals. That's not nearly so many family units. Right. And then next year, the number is looking to be about 700.
Okay.
And that's, so historically speaking, before the Trump administration, this was pretty bipartisan. No matter who was in charge of the government, you typically saw the number was on the national level, 75 to 80,000 per year for the past couple of decades. The Trump administration really cut that back considerably. And now the Biden administration has made a commitment to revive the program. And then, of course, on top of that, we had Afghanistan and also Ukraine. Although there's not a lot of Ukrainians that have been coming to Louisville, mostly there's a big Ukrainian community in Nicholasville, Kentucky. Huh. Interesting. I know. Who knew?
So even though different administrations in Washington change numbers and so forth, for us, it's not a political question.
No, absolutely not. This is part of our obligation to welcome the stranger. And I think as Catholics, it really resonates for us in a special way because we are part of this worldwide church. Of course, many of the people that we're resettling are not Catholic, but some of them are. As you know, we've developed an African community of Catholics here in the diocese in the last few years. And we've seen a large influx of Cubans as well who are outside the refugee process, but there's some anyway. Many of them are Catholic, and so we partner with the Archdiocese to support them as brothers and sisters in faith, in addition to the services that they receive from the government.
I think you started to answer that there. My other question was going to be, in this year or most recent time, where have they been coming from? I know that's just a couple examples of countries. Yeah.
So in terms of true refugees, a lot from the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been in a terrible civil war for 2 or 3 decades at this point. So a lot of folks from Congo. In most recent years, we've seen an uptick in people coming from Syria. Of course, 2 years ago, many Afghans came to Louisville. We have a pretty significant Bhutanese community that continues to grow. But here in Louisville, what's been unusual in the past few years is this influx of Cubans. So before 2020, Louisville had one of the largest Cuban populations in the U.S. outside of South Florida. And since 2020, that population has more than doubled.
Wow.
Yeah. So those folks aren't refugees. They don't get the whole slate of services that refugees get, but the law does have some special provisions for Cubans, so they get some help. And that's been a lot of what we've been doing in the last few years.
I know that if you are present in any civic activity in the community, there's international festivals and parades, and you see the variety of people. And I know this is a stereotype, but just the variety of restaurants
Yes.
and foods that
Absolutely.
are available in Louisville, Kentucky in the last 20 years. And lots of that's directly related to refugee resettlement.
It absolutely is. And I want people to know and be proud of this, because our refugee resettlement program here in Louisville is one of the strongest in the country. And that is the direct result of the work that we've done at Catholic Charities for the last 50 years. We're one of the strongest national partners with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And it's meant here in Louisville this beautiful multicultural fabric that we have as a city. And also, Mayor Fisher used to say this quite often, if you look at the census data, Louisville would have lost population in the last 10 and 20 years if it hadn't been for the growth in the international community. So they're keeping our city growing and thriving because we're able to bring folks here as part of this program.
I certainly know that employers
Yes.
have been grateful for that. As these men and women, adults who are ready to work. And as you said, many go to work right away.
Absolutely.
So we hear that a lot. Okay. This is another area where you could always use volunteers and, of course, donations.
Yes.
What can you tell our listeners about the needs?
Yeah, so I said that this is a program that's federally funded. However, we have a match requirement, and so we have to meet our match with community support, not for all the funds we receive, but certain funds. And we can do that in two ways. We can do it with volunteer time, and we can do it with stuff. So when I say stuff, I'm talking about household items. When refugees arrive, we help set up homes for them. So all of the things that go in those homes, we look to our community to help provide. For volunteers, we can have volunteers who are doing airport meets and driving people to doctor's appointments in those early days and setting up those homes. But also on a little more long-term basis, we look for people to be mentors, to partner up with families and individuals. We have some really beautiful stories about building relationships as people begin to really acclimate and learn to become part of our community here.
I know that some of the ones who I've met over the years talk even about when they move towards citizenship even, and that's been a wonderful story.
If you ever really want to feel good about life, go to a citizenship ceremony sometime. And
of course, it goes back for many years, but the largest seem to be right after the Vietnam War, and a lot of that started there, but it's just now worldwide.
Yeah.
Okay. We could talk 4 more days about refugee resettlement, but let's do some other topics to help people see the breadth of the work of Catholic Charities. You have a program called the Ombudsman Program.
Yes.
There's a word that people don't know what that word always means, and I know it impacts so many people in the counties throughout our archdiocese, the senior population. Let's talk about the Ombudsman Program for seniors.
So ombudsmen are really advocates. That's what the word means at its heart. And we are the ombudsman for the Kipta region and the Lincoln Trail region. So that's most of the counties of the Archdiocese, except for the ones that are closest to Tennessee, which are served by the Barren River District Ombudsman. But here in these sort of northern 2/3 of the Archdiocese, that's over 100,000 beds in 125 different facilities, long-term residential facilities.
Let me stop here a second. So the ombudsman work in the nursing homes?
Well,
other places too.
No, they're visitors in nursing homes, assisted living, even facilities like Home of the Innocents, which we don't always think of, but that's a long-term residential facility for people. So it's mostly elderly, but not entirely. And what we know is that 2/3 of Kentuckians in long-term care don't have regular visitors, which is so sad. But often it doesn't even mean that someone doesn't have family or friends who love them. It just means that they have family and friends who aren't able to get to them regularly. So part of what the ombudsmen do, you can really be a friendly face. You know, you might be helping to to do an errand or to help someone keep up with something that they just don't have a set of hands to do for them outside of the facility. But it can also be more extensive. How to help residents and their families, how to advocate for themselves, to know when a circumstance needs to be escalated. It could be something as simple as a person who says, I always ate my eggs scrambled. I always ate my egg fried. Here they just serve scrambled eggs. I'd like to have a fried egg once in a while, and helping someone work through that with the staff. But then on the other hand, it could be something much more significant. A family member could say to us, I think there are things going missing from mom's room. I don't know what to do. Working with people, anyone who's ever had a loved one in a long-term care facility knows the challenges. And this is something that extends beyond income. This is a service that's available to everybody and that everybody needs, regardless of your history or your resources before you came to the long-term care facility. This is still somebody to help you know how to navigate this new environment that you're living in. So our ombudsmen get a lot of training and a lot of support from staff, but this is really a program that requires a lot of volunteers.
That's really important work. Thanks. Okay, another one. One of my favorites. It's something that we refer to as the Common Earth Gardens. It's food. So let's help me understand this, because this is great.
It is. This is one of my favorites, too. I can't have a favorite. They're all my favorites. It's like a favorite child. But I really do love to talk about this one because Common Earth Gardens has so many beautiful aspects to it. And we've really began this growing out of our work with the refugee resettlement, because so many of the refugees who come to us come from agricultural backgrounds. They're used to farming. They're used to being connected to the earth. And also, their food cultures are different than what we have here. And what they're used to eating, either they can't find it here in the United States, or if they can find it, it's exorbitant. The cost is just well beyond what they could possibly afford to eat it on a regular basis. So being able to provide people with space to garden, to grow for themselves the foods that they're used to reconnect with the earth and with being outside. And, maybe they've come from a more rural area. Now they're living in an apartment in Louisville. And there's so many great opportunities here because these gardens are community gardens, and we look to the gardeners themselves to develop leadership within the garden. And we see these wonderful cross-community connections. You've got, a Congolese gardener here and a Bhutanese gardener there, and they're trading tips and giving each other tools. And there's just so many great aspects to this program, and we're really excited that we are able to expand it. We had a wonderful gift to us that enabled us to increase the land that we have to garden on. And so for the first time ever, we're really going to be able to reach out into the community to find people who want to garden with us. So we need a little time to ramp up, but we're pretty excited about that coming.
About how many sites do we have now?
So we've had sites all over the south and southwest parts of Louisville. We've got 11 different sites now, but these 2 new sites that are coming online. One of them is down near St. Ignatius Martyr, down in the GE appliance area.
Newburgh area.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other is over sort of 3rd Street Row area.
Okay.
And then our other big one is our incubator farm, where we work with people who are interested not just in farming for themselves, but in farming for market, in learning to be selling at farmers markets or even within the commercial food system. That's on Miller's Lane.
You've got dozens of programs. I do want to do one more, though our time is short. As joyful and fun to talk about community gardens, human trafficking is a serious problem in our country and even in our city. It's embarrassing that it happens anywhere, but it happens in our own backyard is really tough. What's Catholic Charities' work with human trafficking about?
Yes. So Catholic Charities, one of our programs is the Bakita Empowerment Initiative, named after St. Josephine Bakita, the patron of trafficking survivors. This is really the flagship program within the Commonwealth of Kentucky for anti-trafficking efforts. We've been doing this work for more than a dozen years. We are a provider of services to men and women, adults and children, native-born and foreign-born, victims of sex and labor trafficking. And we're serving survivors statewide. We actually have sites in Lexington and Owensboro, as well as the work that we do here in Louisville. So just to really try to blanket the state. We provide those direct services to survivors. We do training, and we also have prevention efforts, which is incredibly important, working with young people who are at risk of being trafficked to help break the cycle.
So when you learn about, you get referrals, people tell you we have someone who needs assistance because we think they're being trafficked, law enforcement, those kinds of things get involved too. But Catholic Charities sets up the services.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We began this program, like I said, over a dozen years ago, because law enforcement reached out and said, we're beginning to see this in this community. We're starting to recognize this is here, and we need a social service partner who we can refer people to when we find these circumstances and we arrest the evildoers. We know that the people that have been in this circumstance need help, and who can we turn to? And that was us.
Catholic Charities.
Absolutely.
Lisa, thank you for this great view. I know we only touched on about 4 or 5 of the programs. There could be a dozen more, I know. Before we close here, are there anything you can tell us that, as you've done this work now for these years, a lesson or something that speaks to you personally that you could share to wrap us up?
I have so many great stories. It's really hard for me to just pick one. So I'll just I'll focus just on this one. And those who read the record may have seen this story before. But we opened a new food pantry location. Catholic Charities is operating a second pantry site at the Holy Name campus down near Churchill Downs. We opened it during COVID at the request of Dare to Care because they saw that there was a real need in this area, and several other pantries in the neighborhood had closed. So it took us some time, but they said this was a real need, and we said, well, we'll do what we can. We'll pull this together. We'll make this work because we know it's important. And the very first patron who signed in for the food pantry was named Jesus.
No.
Jesus Hernandez was the very first patron of that food pantry. And I don't know how much more on the nose you can get than that.
My favorite slogan for Catholic Charities is again, used lots of places. We do this work not because they're Catholic, because we're Catholic.
Absolutely.
You honor us. You and your great staff honor us with witnessing to the charitable works of the church and witnessing to the compassion of Jesus Christ.
What I always like to tell people is we are trying really hard to get the word out about Catholic Charities, partly because we need your support, but also because people should have the opportunity to be proud of the work that our church is doing. Not me as much as my staff, but whether they're at the airport meeting people in the middle of the night or providing those services to trafficking victims, they're doing that in the name of our church, and people should know.
Okay, listeners, you got 2 invitations today then. There's programs you can get involved in if you contact Catholic Charities. And if you have some opportunity to provide some generous resources, I promise you they'll be put to good use on the new building or on programs and services for refugees or for seniors in long-term care centers. There's so much good work going on here. I'm glad you said you're proud. You make us proud as a diocese. Thank you for what you do. Listeners, as we were wrapping up this December program, on behalf of Archbishop Shelton and the staff of the Archdiocese, I wish you a most blessed Christmas. Thanks to you for joining us. We look forward to meeting you again next month, next year, with What's New in ArchLou.